Very good afternoon to those of you that are joining us here at Stimson World Headquarters in Washington, D.C., and to those of you as well that are tuning in online. My name is Brian Finlay, and I'm the President and CEO here at the Stimson Center. It's a great pleasure to welcome so many of you for what will be a great conversation, I have no doubt. You are not going to regret your decision to join us here or to tune in. We're going to have a lot of fun. This is a special event here at Stimson for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it marks the public return of the prodigal daughter, Cindy Vestergaard, who for the past year has been wandering the private sector wilderness away from home, has returned as the new director of our Converging Technologies and Global Security Program. And so we're really proud to have Cindy back, particularly working on a topic that really has become so central, not just to the Stimson Center, but to so much of the work we do here in Washington and indeed around the world, whether it is monitoring and providing advance warning of flooding or building climate resilience, whether it's using satellite technology to give advance warning of famine and food insecurity, whether it's using the blockchain to monitor scheduled chemicals as they move around the globe. Clearly, technology is something that has become for us the centerpiece of so many of the solutions that this organization has pioneered for the benefit of global security and prosperity. And so it's a particular pleasure to have Cindy back and to spearhead so much of that work. Welcome back, Cindy. Here in our 35th year of operation at the Stimson Center, we are reminded, I think, that the core of this organization at its founding in 1989 was issues of national security and defense cooperation. It really has been the mainstay of our work for so many years, and it is why we are proud to host this discussion today with Scott Millar, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister at Canada's Department of National Defense. For those of you that are maybe joining at home at the end of your workday, I might recommend you turn the next hour into a drinking game, and every time you hear the word out or about, you should take a quick, I'm sorry for those of you here in town. You will understand what I mean as soon as these two get started, and particularly as you hear my colleague Cindy Vestergaard, who of course is a proud British Columbia native as well. Scott's role at DND expands policy work in strategic priority areas, including procurement reform, national and economic security, multilateral, multi-domain initiatives, including cyber space and so forth. He provides overarching support in that capacity for the policy group's current mandate, and specifically on files pertaining to culture change, provincial territorial relations, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and other issues. He also does shoe repair and tax preparation on the side because his file is not big enough. Scott, a big welcome. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Washington, and in particular, welcome to the Stimson Center. And Dr. Vestergaard, I now give you the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate it, and thank you for the warm welcome, and to Scott. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to launch right in so that we give ample time to get through a number of different issues about Pillar 2 and AUKUS. So first, of course, by way of background, AUKUS was created in September 2021 between Australia, UK, and US, hence AUKUS, which is, by the way, actually one of the best acronyms out there, particularly in this space. And, basically for, of course, formalizing an enhanced trilateral treaty partnership, where Pillar 1 is subs. So it is intended to strengthen the ability of each government to support security and defense interests and, in quotes, to help sustain peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. So there are two pillars. As I mentioned, the first one is all about submarines, specifically the decision to support Australia in acquiring conventionally armed, nuclear-powered submarines at the earliest possible date. Now, I don't think we're here to talk about what all that could mean, but in March 23, the leaders of Australia, UK, and US announced an optimal pathway to commission 8 US nuclear submarines to protect Australian interests and people in the region, and the move was met, of course, with mixed reactions globally. And there's critique and concern, especially from China, France, and a number of others. Pillar 2 is supporting the development of advanced capabilities to streamline collaboration among the 3 nations. Pillar 2 focuses on trilateral cooperation in emerging technologies, which of course is dear to my program, including AI, autonomy, electronic warfare, hypersonics, counter-hypersonic, I'm not going to get that right, undersea warfare, information sharing, and of course a number of other things. So it's this second pillar, Pillar 2, that we're exploring together today, and particularly your role as ADM for horizontal policy at D&D. And with that background, Scott, we're going to dive right in to the potential strategic role that Canada can play. So the first one is looking at the potential for Canada's participation. In June of last year, we heard that the U.S. might be open to allowing more countries to participate in AUKUS, and particularly in the technological development and defense capabilities aspect of Pillar 2. So I wanted to ask you what you agree, or what the strengths are that are identified in Canada in the inclusion of Pillar 2. Sorry, I missed the reports, particularly those that were signed by Johnson and Abbott, recommending that AUKUS Pillar 2 be expanded to include Canada. So if you could take us through kind of Canada's capabilities and strengths. And
I'll just quickly say thank you to the Stimson Center for pulling this together, and really wonderful, Cindy, to be with you. And we might want to keep talking about BC and the time that we spent there. And Brian, thank you as well. The strengths. So, and you see it laid out in the report, but I will touch on them here. The first one would be our deep integration that we already have with the U.S. 30 years recognized as domestic source within the defense industrial base. You have the NTIB, of which we've been a member, and which is referenced in the U.S.'s National Defense Industrial Strategy as a key part of the web of production, and recognizing, of course, Canada's enduring role in that. We were the original folks in the NTIB, where in 2017 it opened up to Australia and New Zealand. Also, under the Defense Production Act, you have Title III, where the Pentagon is making investments in Canadian companies to support the U.S. defense industrial base. As well, you have a ream of research and development MOUs, technology sharing MOUs. I have colleagues here, Joanne Lestraco, who works out of the embassy leading on defense production or defense acquisition, as well as foreign military sales, which is another thing that we've been doing for many, I think 50 years with y'all. And I have Nicholas Todd here, who's, I've invited him, but yeah, he should be up here, is the Vice President of the Canadian Association of Defense and Security Industries, and probably we'll have time for you to go deeper on things that I'm just touching on right now for the interest of time. So this deep integration that we've had, where basically we all rely on one another for the shared capabilities that keep us safe in the continental defense standpoint, and then support us in our operations when we move out together across the world, that's incredible strength, and we rely on one another. We each have niche capabilities, niche strengths that we provide to one another. It's really interesting that these large platforms that you all use down here, we build a lot of exquisite advanced capabilities that get grafted onto those platforms. So we ride together, and I would put that first. The second one, critical minerals. And again, those reports mention that. We have rare earth. We are a high source of certain rare earth. Just rare earth?
you have a lot of rare earth.
It's rare earth. Yeah, I feel like I don't want to say rare earth minerals. It's rare earth. It's important.
Yep.
Don't ask any follow-up questions on rare earth, please. As well as the minerals that are required to support the advanced capabilities that is looked at under AUKUS. So lithium being one of those. So you're going to do uncrewed systems, autonomous systems. You need batteries that last. And so it's interesting that Canada and the U.S. had launched a joint action plan announced by the President and the Prime Minister to sequester $250 million for acquisition investments into Canadian and U.S. mineral companies. So we need all the EMs, the lithiums, the niobiums, and all the rest. So that would be number 2. 3 would be geography as a force multiplier. So I'm not sure everybody always tracks the degree that we are integrated from a military standpoint. We've got 700 folks down posted in the U.S. You have about 100 up. A good number of those folks are at NORAD, where here we are, looking at protecting the continental defense from air-based threats. Those air-based threats are changing. We have air-breathing missiles that go further, and we have hypersonics. So what have we done together? Well, we have a joint action plan between us and the U.S. To modernize NORAD. And Canada announced close to $40 billion, and that's not a dream, that's a costed thing, it's planned, it's in our reference levels, we're moving out on it. On joint projects around command and control, air-to-air missiles, and really interesting project called Over-the-Horizon Radar, which with the curvature of the Earth, if you see a missile coming at you, you only see a little bit and you have very little decision space. Over-the-horizon radar allows you to bounce a signal off the atmosphere so you can see over, and that creates more margin for you to actually quickly respond. But as part of that $40 billion, there's also $4 billion set aside for science and tech investments. And those investments are in things that absolutely map onto Pillar 2. It's hypersonics, it's uncrewed systems, it's quantum, it's AI. It's all the things. And so we have a really robust defense industrial section at National Defense working really well with our ecosystems that we have. And we've been buying a lot of stuff. And somebody at some point will ask me about defense spending, but in the last little bit, we've announced $40 billion of contracts that have been awarded. And that is on really niche exquisite platforms. So we're going to have icebreakers that are Arctic offshore patrol vessels. We have Boeing in terms of the P-8A Poseidon, which is a Canadian multi-mission aircraft that allows you to hunt submarines and to have full maritime domain awareness. And we've the F-35s, 88 of those. We have remote piloted aircraft systems. And all those things are just, at the end of the day, a plane or a vessel or whatever. I could mention frigates, I could mention other things, but in the interest of time. But to make them what they are, they require sensors. They require niche capabilities, advanced capabilities, and that is something that we are actually all working together on right now. If AUKUS didn't exist, we're all moving forward on that. We have... I've got 2 more, and then I'm going to let you ask the question, I swear to God. The capabilities that exist, and that is pointed out in some of those reports, and it's something that we would point out as well. We are world-class when it comes to electronic warfare, on undersea capabilities, on quantum, on cyber, and what we do in terms of defense and other operations, and as well as AI. And we have these robust academic ecosystems. We have incredibly resilient, really innovative startups in Canada. And actually, Australia's Strategic Policy Institute has actually mapped all the countries against the Pillar 2 capabilities, and talking about 23 high-impact research areas that are necessary to deliver on Pillar 2. Canada ranks within the top 10 of 17 of 23 of those. As well, the British Parliament came out with a report crowing about Canada as a world leader around cyber. So these are capabilities that we have that are at the ready. And maybe the last thing that I would say is that the Five Eyes. It's really funny that I think the chattering classes started talking about when AUKUS was announced, oh my gosh, the Five Eyes is dead. Canada and New Zealand got kicked out. Why'd they get kicked out? How do we get them back in? Well, there was a bit of a mapping exercise to count all the Five Eyes bodies that are active right now. There are 156 of those, and then they stopped counting.
Wow.
The Five Eyes is not dead. There's so much that we are doing actually in all the AUKUS Pillar 2 pieces with the Five Eyes. So it's not Australia, UK, US over here, and us over there with New Zealand. It's all of us over there working on these things. And that integration goes back, to World War II. And so that is something that we see as we're very active participants in that. It's always tricky on this because in the unclassified setting to go deeper, but those would be some of the strengths. Do we have time for any other questions?
That's a long list. So is it Canada's intention then to position itself as a strategic partner on Pillar 2 technology development for a future invitation to join an expanded AUKUS?
Yeah, so again, we were already moving out on these capabilities, and again, the $4 billion that was announced more recently on NORAD modernization. Look, we definitely looked with interest as the signal came out, as you said, in July of last year, but then at the AUKUS Defense Ministers meeting in June, or in December, I should say, where it mentioned about looking at possibilities to open up to partners. Look, yeah, we were never in the nuclear sub game. We get that. I think that the ambition that was launched or mentioned around Pillar 2 when AUKUS was launched was ambitious, and it's it's good to have ambition. There was clearly a period of time, and some of this was laid out in the December Defense Minister's statement of the work to figure out, okay, on Pillar 2, what are the things that we are going to do? And they laid out those various lines of effort. It will be up to AUKUS members to determine when they want to open things up to other partners. But again, regardless of AUKUS existing, we are in a world where advanced capabilities are being used by adversaries to undermine our collective security. And we, like AUKUS partners, are doing the same things. We need to fast field those capabilities. And that's really what AUKUS is about. And that's the other confusion. People are like, well, you have a mineral strategy or you have this or that, shouldn't you be in? No, I mean, AUKUS is focused in fast fielding of these advanced capabilities. In the Five Eyes context, we're focused on that too. So we need to do procurement reform. Canada has a whole government procurement review right now to get that fast fielding out. Defense industry relationships are key, moving from buying a thing to working together to have a capability for a nation, and having from transactions to strategic conversations. So similarly, we are looking at that the way that AUKUS partners have been. An important point on this too is the security around this. And that is something that exists. These advanced capabilities, for them to succeed, they have to be protected from those being aware of what they are and knowing how to defeat them. Because of what I referenced in the first question around our close connection to the defense industrial base, our ticket to ride to be considered a domestic source for you, and to also have the exemption to export licenses so that you can export to us, we can re-export, required us to set up a very robust gold standard controlled goods program, export control program that completely maps onto the U.S. program to give you confidence that if you share with us, we're not going to give something to country X that we would be concerned about. That used to be really easy when it was like a tank, but dual use, really hard.
What does that mean for AI?
Exactly. So I think that is already a strength that we have that I think is compelling to AUKUS partners, and I think that's why they are thinking about opening it up. I can talk about our cybersecurity measures as well. Last thing I would say, though, special access programs. There are classified, really niche programs that are not just, hey, you have a classification. It's like IT around it, it's procedures around it, locked and controlled. And I think that makes us a compelling partner. So we'll see if things open up. I think that the last thing I would say is there is probably a concern because AUKUS is ambitious and they want to go fast and the threats are real. But in Five Eyes context and in the NATO context, we're all talking about allied shoring. We can't duplicate effort. We don't have the time. How do we go fast? And I think that it certainly would be a shame the degree to which we're having conversations over here in a Five Eyes context that aren't mapping in a Three Eyes context. And at a time when we're all looking to broaden out relationships and go deeper on integration, so when we go out, we definitely don't want to be in the world where there's less integration and we're shrinking a bit.
Thank you. Actually, kind of taking that forward, it's obviously a very young partnership, AUKUS, 2.5 years in. But what do you think are, kind of asking your thoughts on the current work that's underway in the three countries to set up a legislative policy and regulatory frameworks to enable this alliance? Where has AUKUS seen the greatest success in this? And how should they be built in this ever-changing world that you've already outlined?
Right. So we've been watching, we watched with great interest the National Defense Authorization Act that was signed off in December that has the AUKUS legislative, regulatory, and policy underpinnings necessary to make that happen. And basically it opens out, again, we've had these exemptions that we've enjoyed because we've proven ourselves around exemptions from export licenses. And the idea of moving that out to Australia and to the UK, that's great. Because again, we need to collaborate within a Five Eyes context, so the degree that we move closer and closer to a defense-free trade zone that's broader, that's great. UK and Australia similarly have their own pieces of legislation that have to correspond. And I do know that there is a report due back to Congress around the degree to which those systems set up in the UK and Australia give the confidence to make those happen. I think there are two reflections that I have that are cautions for me, only because I've been in legislative processes myself. There's what you put out there, and then there's what happened as legislators look at it. What would be a shame a bit is that right now our exemptions in Canada are on unclassified technologies. Again, like the typical things you would find on a munitions list. And again, we have this whole controlled goods program that we spend a lot of money on to make sure that you all have confidence on that. Well, now we're going to be looking at advanced capabilities that are really hard to figure out. They're dual use. And Australia and the UK will have those exemptions for classified. So we're happy to support them in trying to stand that up, and we've offered that we can teach them and show them the degree of what it takes to set up domestic programs to give confidence to the U.S. that we enjoy now. But it would be, I would hope that would extend to Canada as well. Because if we cannot share with them at the class, or if we cannot transfer technology to one another and our industries to work with one another at that classified level, well, then we're going to be slowing things down, and it will lead to a bit of an ITAR taint, as it's known. On the same side, we will still enjoy, again, because you all kept Canada in the National Defense Authorization Act. Well, not you, because you're Canadian. We get to re-export and transfer because there's a trust that we'll give in the right place. I don't think, if I'm correct in that exists for the UK and Australia. And so that's another kind of disconnect there. So as we all want to work together and integrate, whether it's an AUKUS or whatever, we can not do class, and we can not re-export in all cases. And so that's a little janky, not sure how Webster's defines janky. So that's a caution. We'll watch that with interest. We definitely have seen great messaging partners about, again, you've kept Canada in, but let's keep Canada in a way that supports the broader than AUKUS integration that is happening now and needs to continue to happen.
So there are already a lot of capabilities that Canada already brings to North America and the relationship there, which of course can be grown and expanded on,
right,
as you've mentioned. What lessons do you think AUKUS can learn from other international partnerships?
Right.
Both in terms, of course, what works and what doesn't.
Right. Well, when I think about, I've touched on the Five Eyes, but it's interesting with the National Defense Industrial Strategy, the sections that talk about the NTIB as being a really necessary condition that really to make it work, to, as it calls, to have the web of production with real allied shoring across the 4 countries, and in a Five Eyes context. So that does require revitalization, and so that we're not just sort of sharing country updates with one another, and we're really figuring out what do joint requirements look like, who's gonna, I've got this capability, you take that capability, I've got this company here, I might not be spending on that company here now, but you should, and you've got that covered. I think there's some real opportunities there, and real lessons learned from the process that we've all been in for a while. So I would say that we should all keep one eye on that. But the biggest lesson is we have a pacing threat where capabilities are being used now in theater by different countries that one country cannot go it alone. So we all have to ride together, and we have to ride with other friends. And it can't, again, the degree that that's smaller, that limits that. And the other thing that I would say is let's learn from NATO and from others where we're talking about joined up requirements and interoperability. Because when we all go out in theater on these same platforms that we all bought, if they're not talking to each other and not interoperable, and we're doing a whole thing over here that we don't see over there, we're all going to be a little less safe.
Exactly. And I've got a whole bunch of other questions,
Sure.
actually, just from pulling a lot of the threads. But I think one of the ones to highlight first is Canada's specific interests. I mean, it is a Pacific nation.
Yeah.
So its interests strategically within the Indo-Pacific region, if you could maybe outline some of those.
I'm glad you asked, because I wanted to say it in the first answer, but I realized I was killing time a little bit there.
No one knew Canadians were so winded, by the way.
Well, I'm from BC.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sarah Cohen knows that. So I talked about NORAD modernization. If something's coming at us from the Pacific, it's coming over the top. Mm-hmm. So so on Indo-Pacific, we have an Indo-Pacific strategy. There's a defense pillar around that. We are the only country that rides with you through the Taiwan Strait to ensure freedom of navigation. We've done 9 of those sails together. We've all been buzzed together and had unsafe interactions. We are pushing out, we're doing exercises together with other countries. We're doing capacity building in a number of key areas. But I want to stay within the AUKUS in terms of advanced capabilities. So as goes the Arctic, so goes the Indo-Pacific region. We have 27,000 kilometers of Pacific coastline in Canada. I don't think everybody always, I don't know why people wonder, are we part of the Pacific? We grew up in BC, right? I mean, go to Vancouver. It's very, very Indo-Pacific. And so, so we share the concerns, and that's why we're with you in terms of contesting where we have to, challenges to the rules-based international order. The technology that we are doing for the Arctic is in addition to what we're doing in Indo-Pacific strategy, because it also shores up that. And frankly, what we do in the Arctic also protects NATO's back door. And so, yeah.
Are there any concerns? I mean, as we talked about earlier, AUKUS, of course, is not without its critics. France, Beijing, others within the Indo-Pacific area. So are there any concerns that aligning Canada with AUKUS might bring more criticism for its involvement? And if so, how might Canada be prepared to navigate this variety of international reactions that AUKUS is generating?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, we're talking Pillar 2. I get on Pillar 1. There's confusion. I think it's just there's confusion. We're all working together on something, and we're actually working on the same things together. But then over here in this Three Eyes context, it would be really unfortunate if there was an AUKUS classification so that we can all talk about this over here, but then a couple have to leave the room. But then those couple or more actually have something that really would help over here. And so it's strange. I think there are real opportunities in Pillar 2 to, without is it membership, is it expansion, is it partnership, is it whatever? At the end of the day, us all having eyes on of what's going on there, those that, again, have, I think, the secure classification protection systems that we have in a North American context, so that there's that trust. And then we can deconflict and not be doing the same stuff and hoist in where we need to hoist in. Or in an AUKUS context, say, you know what, this is a whole lot of work and we're trying to build subs. Maybe this thing can just go over to a Five Eyes context because we're all going to benefit there. So I think that all is still being figured out for Pillar 2, but it is an absence of information that's causing the confusion, and we share in that confusion.
Staying also on criticism levels, this next question is more related to arms control obligations, as you mentioned, the classified and unclassified side also. But there are recent efforts to amend the U.S. export control regimes to accommodate AUKUS. Then these have drawn criticism from arms control advocates who say that the erosion of regulations undermine the essential oversight of the U.S., particularly when it comes to its origin, defense technology, and to add national security and sensitive tech diversion risks.
Right.
So how does Canada see arms control obligations in the context of AUKUS, as well as demands for greater export control alignment in lieu of the regulatory carve-outs?
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to this a little bit before. So I have a responsibility from a national defense context with some colleagues around export control. And the amount of possible transfers of technology that we have to assess have just grown exponentially because of the dual use. Like this thing over here that is benign in one context can be malignant in another context. And so when does that happen? The technology, of course, is going so fast, so that's like keeping abreast of that. And again, like having the regimes that we have to ensure that we have strong export control programs are key to our collective security, let alone a ticket to ride for us to have deeper integration. I think it will be up to, again, like the U.S. to assess what that looks like for others. I don't want to speak in terms of like political views of certain countries around protectionism, around this and that, but certainly what we have had as exemptions where they exist has been something that has deepened our integration as a North American industrial base. So the degree that that can blow out and be wider, that's great. The degree that that is done in a measured, really sensitive way to make sure that we are all staying safer, because if somebody else figures out what we're using and how to defeat it before we use it, then it doesn't matter if you fast-fielded it.
How does it work with I recognize this is going to be a little bit more of a future forecasting question, but going back to AI, for example, a lot of these emerging technologies, as you said, are moving at a rapid pace, and it's propelling us faster and faster towards Industry 4.0, right? And so, but what does that mean in a context where, AUKUS Pillar 2, for example, on AI, where technology is racing so far ahead and governments are still trying to keep pace?
Right.
What does that look like in a multilateral partnership?
So what that looks like right now is under the technical cooperation program amongst the Five Eyes, all the folks that are a whole lot that didn't take a political science degree or a psychology degree, I'd be working Dunkin' Donuts if I wasn't up here, are meeting all the time. So my colleague in National Defense that is the lead on both for data, digital, and AI, that means that him and I ride together in a whole lot of international context to ensure responsible use of AI, ensure figuring out how for us to keep pace with our partners and keep pace with our adversaries in terms of their application of it. And I think that the existential threat is fully felt by all on this. And again, from a research and development perspective, with the right technical experts working on it, we are all rolling out our own AI strategies for defense, and we're doing it in such a way that's keeping an eye to what our partners are doing, so that we do it right together. So that's what. How are we doing on time? You looked at the back.
I did look at the back. I'm hoping to have a microphone up here for Or up to the podium. You've been asked to go to the podium, Nicholas. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and why you are here and why you have the podium.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation and working closely with Scott on this. So, Nicholas Todd, and I'm with the Canadian Association of Defence and Security Industries, kind of the trade association representing Canada's national security innovation base, which contributes to over about 78,000 jobs across Canada, about $12.2 billion in sales, over 50% of that going exports, and half of those exports at least going to here in the United States, with 90% of the DIB being SMEs, and very research intensive compared to kind of average manufacturing sector. And so it's great to hear this. And, you know, I was just reading through online and came across comments that Admiral Aquilino had made just yesterday to the HASC, you know, reminding people that all indications are about the PLA being able to meet their 2027 deadline, which, you know, we're already in 2024. So in terms of the pressure of the warfighter is very clear. So for some, that comment might be alarmist, but for others, it's a very big motivator. And certainly for Canadian industry, that is a motivator to deliver. So I just wanted to kind of outline about three different ways where Canadian industry can help advance U.S. national security interests with this. First, in terms of, we've heard, but you know, don't quite appreciate the degree to which Canadian firms are already legally treated as domestic sources of supply, compliant with that most rigorous industrial security, which costs them a lot of money, a lot of compliance costs, processes to tie all that down, and on the export controls part, which we can say, you know, our government takes exceptionally seriously, even to close security partners and allies. So in some ways, it's not quite Canada joining AUKUS Pillar 2 here. It's a little more of the Australia and the United Kingdom getting some, but not all of the regulatory accommodations that we already have and have put to work to the United States security for decades, right? And so it's a new concept, not a lot of time. There's no yet even AUKUS budgets out there for these kinds of work to happen. And so that's why I think, you know, a point that I wanted to make is if there's any further changes in implementation or around this ITAR, it should not be done in a way that undermines that existing Canada-U.S. integration in the industrial base and the collaboration that happens with our very close partners in Australia and in the UK, because there's no point throwing sand in the gear through some of the items that Scott had mentioned, because that's throwing sand into the American gears more than anyone else. And so we have something to offer in terms of our deep experience here with ITAR. The country with the most experience in ITAR is us and our companies who work with us every day. And so instead of waiting for this, you know, regulatory reform to happen, we can already bring these decades of experience to bear from Canadian industry, working with the U.S. DIB, with the hundreds of innovation programs that DoD has out there, so that we can learn what works, what doesn't, and how to make it better for when AUKUS does come online in that way and the regulatory package is updated. So, you know, this could mean the DoD selecting a tech challenge for a small set of Canadian firms that are curated for that capability to work closely with U.S. primes to deliver this technology analogous to Pillar 2. And, you know, NORAD's certainly one where there is NORAD modernization. It's looking to the Pacific and areas of very similar technological challenge where, you know, there's interesting maybe uncrewed underwater port-to-port capability, wireless that we have in Canada. There's space, a huge part of that as well, AI for decision-making enhancement. So that's pretty important as well. And maybe the final point to make is when 43% of Canada's DIB biennial sales are subsidiaries of U.S. headquartered defense companies, AUKUS is not an initiative that is going to let loose new competitors in the U.S. to defense companies in the United States in their own home market, right? And even Canadian headquartered companies source 25% of their supply chains from the Americans. So working with Canadian companies is further strengthening U.S. defense firms by bringing these select, often, but not always, but often, SMEs with niche capabilities to the warfighter, which is the traditional role that we've played since the end of the Second World War in that structure. And so Canadian industry is already a key enabler of U.S. industry, and U.S. industry believes that keeping Canadian firms in these American supply chains is an asset, and that we should not be accidentally throwing sand in the gears in implementation at the risk of the strategic objectives that AUKUS and those who've created it are trying to achieve, because we all share in that strategic objective. And so I think the choice here is clear as we look to 2027, and as we hope to make progress on these AUKUS regulatory changes. We can already get started on projects today that work with Canada and U.S. primes to inform what's working well, and then where to make further enhancements to make AUKUS Pillar 2 a success. So that's where I'd kind of put some comments to kind of complement what you two have been talking about very eloquently.
Thank you very much. If there is a question, I might ask you to come back up here. But we're going to open up the questions to the floor, and also to those who are online. Please feel free. I do have a little tablet here that will tell me what the questions are. But first we will start here. And I see a hand up over here. Please introduce yourself as well. Then our online audience wouldn't hear you.
No?
Oh, it's all good.
Yes, it is. Okay. Hi, I'm Deborah Decker with the Stimson Center. Two easy questions, I think. You said $40 billion. Over what period of time is the contract period for that? And then the second question is, President Biden had a very big executive order on AI. Mm-hmm. And in it, he called for registration of all companies who are even thinking about doing dual-use AI model production, and he called for that under the Defense Production Act. Are you all doing anything similar? Would you fall under that, under the DPA, or? I mean, there are over 100 requirements in his executive order.
So anything for us to qualify for DPA, I think we have to qualify with what's required of U.S. industry. So that would be the answer to that, unless colleagues have anything they want to add to it. So the spend, so two things I would say about that. When we say we're going to bring something to the fight, whether it's the $40 billion of platforms that we were talking about in terms of the contracts, and that's like the multi-mission aircraft, that's the F-35s and the rest that we've announced just over the last couple of years, or it's the $40 billion on NORAD modernization. Those are things that, so Canada's funny. We don't sort of say, hey, we're going to do a cajillion billion on something, and then we go and try and figure it out, and then we hope that the legislators vote the money. We're maybe too cautious sometimes in Canada, but, you know, don't record this. Can you stop the recording? Splice this. When we announce something, it's because the plan's been vetted, it's been costed, and ultimately Parliament has approved the money, and it's in our reference levels. So the project is a costed thing rolling out. Some that we're all doing together on NORAD mod is amortized over multiple years. But that's also in a U.S. context as well. So everything that we're doing NORAD mod, it's actually a joint action plan, and we're moving out together on those things. Yeah.
1 sec, Deb.
Yeah.
Deborah.
I'm sorry. On the first thing you said, so are you doing the same thing? Are you asking all companies in Canada who to do some of the same requirements that are in the executive order on AI?
There is no government edict around that, but for those companies to play, then they know that that's a requirement. Joanne, do you want to? Or
the only thing I'd add in is, so in Canada we don't work the same way. We don't have an executive order that flows down in the same way that it does in the U.S. But we qualify under the U.S. process, so we would be able to feed into the U.S. system under the Title III, the authorities under the Title III Act. But that doesn't mean that we're not doing those kinds of technologies already in Canada. And that's where I think Scott is speaking to how we would feed in either with US partners or ourselves speaking to US DoD to be able to be a part of that. We do have an AI strategy
Yeah.
that then sort of complements that for the North American defense industrial base. I don't know if that answers your question, but it might help.
Joanne, just who you are.
Oh, sorry. I'm with the Government of Canada, and I do defense acquisition.
Any other questions? Yes. Before you go so far, Katie. Yeah.
Hi. First, thank you for this informative, really informative panel. My name is Frank Puzzo. I'm at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and I had been the counsel at Naval Reactors before that. So AUKUS has a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I bet.
Especially Pillar 1. But I did want to, you referenced the FY24 U.S. National Defense Authorization Act. There's several references to Canada in the Act.
Right.
And it was unclear exactly, what Congress was trying to say, and I think Brian may be able to answer this as well. Whether they were saying, we want you to emulate the system we have with Canada, which is kind of how I read it, or whether we do have exemptions, export exemptions, the export licenses are a lot more open highway, or are they saying something more along the lines of, hey, Canada's ready to rock and roll on AUKUS today, and we can move forward. So I was wondering what your views were on what do you think was trying to be communicated, and what's your vision of what Canada's role in AUKUS Pillar 2 will be? Pillar 1 is a separate issue entirely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thanks for that. And I'll be careful at sort of guessing at, choices around legislation. But my read of it is the fact that, first of all, it's great to see Canada in there. I think it's very much reflective of the fact that Canada's already in there in a real way, and then it's extending it out, what we enjoy now because of how we've worked together, out to them as well. There are differences, but I would say that my understanding of why we would be included is because we're already integrated with you. That's my take on it.
Thought I saw a hand over here. Or we'll go there, and then, or wherever Katie's going to go. Yeah, there we go. Great, thanks.
Paul Esau, Wisconsin Project on Nuclear Arms Control. Mr. Millar, would you say that Canada's export control regime currently meets the requirements that have been laid out for Australia and UK regimes as put in the NDA 2024, so that if a report was to be required on Canada's compatibility with the requirements, that Canada would meet that threshold? That's the first question. Secondly, Canada, the UK, and Australia obviously all have rather export-oriented defense industrial bases, and in some ways compete for similar markets both in the Middle East and around the world. So is there, in your opinion, how are we going to manage, if Canada does join AUKUS, the competitive economic environment between the four nations, including the U.S., with the strategic benefits of all being part of that same regime? Is that going to be an issue in terms of the economic sort of workings of the agreement, or is that going to be overcome by the clear necessity of being able to compete with China in various capacities?
Okay, maybe as I answer the first question, I'll tee up Nicholas for the second question. On the first question, we already have a gold standard export control program. It maps completely onto yours, and it was and is always been our ticket to ride in terms of the integration with you. So I'm not concerned about, we meet it now, and my only thing would be that that, along with our special access program that protects, along with our cyber defenses that we have to protect our government agencies and critical infrastructure, those are things that pre-position us for what would move into a classified space. Because again, to make the point, we have this very robust system for an unclassified program. I will leave it to others to make the call. The degree to which Australia and the UK and what they have there for the classified will be sufficient. I think the report is coming back to Congress on that by April 20th. They'll make that call. I'm a government wonk who gives advice and implements. I don't want to give a policy opinion on that particular thing. Nicholas, just anything on that second question? Microphone coming.
Thank you. You know, we might even exceed already since,
Yes, yeah.
you know, to
Fair
be
point.
fair, that we likely exceed. And Canada acceded to the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty recently. So again, we take our export controls very seriously, not just from espionage, counterproliferation, and the kind of the hard security, but also in terms of human rights and those concerns as well. And so there's both concerns that are there, that the government's setting out the rules and industry following those rules very closely. And so we're very active on that. In terms of economic competition, I tried to speak a bit of that with respect to the Americans in terms of how we're already integrated in there, and the other is around the nature of the supply side on Canadian industry. We're not a platform maker. We've got General Dynamics Land Systems that has a Canadian version of the Stryker, the light armored vehicle, that is the backbone of the Canadian Army. And we're regenerating our shipbuilding industry for Canadian kind of platform and then sustainment of those. Now, ships aren't sold whole, so it's often more in Canada. It's about systems, subsystems, parts and components. Now, AUKUS Pillar 2 is a little different. We're talking about technology. It's developing that technology, and sometimes it has to be implemented and integrated at scale. And when you're talking about commercial companies, for defense, there's basically market failure. So the government has to intervene in some way for commercial companies with, you know, they're running out of money tomorrow, and they can't wait for the development cycles in a procurement cycle of decades. And so there has to be a very different way to engage with the private sector. They rarely own the entire solution. Competition or collaborations is much more common in those kinds of environments. So the markets are quite different. There'd likely be more competition between Canada and Australia in terms of probably some similar markets, but they have a lot of SMEs as well. And a lot of kind of the larger companies are foreign headquartered companies. So it's a very different markets, and so you have to look at the supply side in order to inform yourself about that. Thanks.
And then over here, yep. In the brown.
Thanks a lot. Look, thanks very much for the discussion. My name's Tom Corbin. I'm from the US Study Centre in Sydney, Australia, currently spending a week in DC talking about exactly these issues around export controls.
Like, come up.
My question is around the cost of compliance with kind of being inside what you might term an ITAR bubble. So the debate in Australia right now has moved on from whether export control harmonisation is necessary or not, really to what downstream costs or considerations there might be once Australia is inside an ITAR bubble or an ITAR tent. So, for example, the costs of small to medium-sized enterprises improving their cybersecurity provisions, if you will, to meet kind of a collective standard. So I'm wondering if there are any lessons that you or Nicholas can perhaps offer us for Australia in terms of those downstream costs that might be associated with an ITAR carve-out for Australia.
Yeah. I might tee up Joanne on the cyber maturity model, but I would say there's a lot in there, and there's some that the government bears at the cost, and then there are other things that key companies that are part of the industrial base bears a cost, and there's services provided out. In terms of control goods and export controls, it's millions of dollars, it's bureaucracy, it's people that are required to do it. It's good to do, I'm not complaining about that, but it's again, it's to the degree to which what will be deemed as compliant with what's required, and I would defer to U.S. legislators and others to meet that or to determine that. On cybersecurity, lots of investments on the Canadian side. I can tell you what a cyber center costs for the government of Canada. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, but then they give advice and move out capability to companies that request it, but also they have to make their investments. So it's really difficult for me to put that on, but and then again the special access programs, because you have to put a iron fist around each of these things so they don't leak out. That's technology, that's process, that's people, that's governance and oversight. So that's just part of it. Anything else to add on that, Joanne? Or sorry, one more, Mike. Sorry. Just you played more closely on.
Yeah, I think the only thing
The only thing I would add in is that the Government of Canada last year committed $25 million, so additional monies to support the, like a replication of the U.S. system of the cybersecurity modernization, the maturity model. So that means that we will be directly replicating that same process that's in the United States, the same standards in the United States, that will be in Canada as well. In fact, we're ready to go now. We're just waiting for the U.S. program to launch. So, you know, in all these different facets, we have replicated that in the North. So it's not cheap, but it's worth it.
So we have 3 minutes left. See if there's one more question. Otherwise, we might actually even end 3 minutes early. But is there,
Well, I might
I don't
say
have
one or
any
two more
questions.
things.
I don't have any questions at all on my thing. Is there one that you want to? No? All right. So on that note, I don't know if those who were doing the drinking game with the out and about, if I counted, I think
Butte and a butte?
I think they'd be drunk by now. But I think we did a really good job. This is only
good.
tea. This is only
Yeah,
tea. But thank you so much, Scott. This has been a really fascinating conversation for me in terms of looking at how technology is also leaping us ahead
Right.
in a variety of different of our multilateral and potential multilateral partnerships. So very much appreciate it. Give Scott a warm thank you, and we hope to see you back when Canada's part of Pillar 2.
We'll see. Thank you so much, Cindy
I know you
and
had- yes,
Brian.
sorry.
I would just say 3 quick things if I would leave with you, is whether it's fighting with you in the fields of Europe and the 100 million of our folks that have died alongside with you in many battles, or what we all did together through the Cold War to share capabilities to stay ahead of the Soviet threat, and what we're already doing now in the Five Eyes on everything we're talking about, Pillar 2. Everything that we bring the best to the fight, and what we commit to do, we do it. Second of all, you cannot fight the speed or defeat the speed of a hypersonic missile at the speed of regulatory bureaucracy. So we have to, bureaucracy is important, but we have to get that right. And lastly, I would say, and just to emphasize that point, we're going broader and deeper on integration with more partners to get things right, to shrink that or to go slower at the time that these capabilities are attriting so quickly would be a fail. Your U.S. industry is calling on Canada to be a partner within AUKUS Pillar 2 because they get that piece. And we need to make sure that the best of what we each have is available freely to one another to do this. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thanks.